Hey, good morning, everyone out there in YouTube land. Hey, we've been kicking around an idea on my Facebook page, and by the way, if you haven't came and liked that, I would highly recommend it. It's where I post all my videos first. It's also a great place to discuss the videos, give feedback, input, and even tell me what you want next, those type things. But one of the things I threw out there a week or so ago was been thinking about this series of videos, which would be more instructor based. As you can see here, probably be more PowerPoint based, along with some live videos and pictures and whatnot. But the goal would be to kind of do an audio tube amp 101 series, and I've got the syllabus laid out here. I'm going to show that to you today. But in saying that, it would probably be a fairly long journey. I'm looking at it, and it's probably a good series of 10 or 15 YouTube videos with a lot of different content. And so I just like to get some feedback after this first video from you. So either reply out on my YouTube page or come on the Facebook page and give us some feedback as to whether this is something you're really interested in, because it's an awful lot of work on my part and time commitment, that takes away from my life and family. Although I'm doing this stuff because I enjoy it. I just want to make sure people would get value out of it. So the whole premise here would be basically a basic 101 type series all the way through, a lot of different topics, and I'll walk you through that in a minute. It would be designed to hit the basics, not to go too deep. In other words, you don't need a bunch of math or physics per se to be able to pull off what I would teach in this. But I think it would be a great primer for what's going on out there today in the tube amp world. A little bit of the history, how do we get where we are, what it's all about. You'll see here in the syllabus in just a minute what all I would be covering, and just kicking this idea around. So if it takes off, we'll go with it and continue down this path. If not, we'll stop. But I'll let you guys, the consumer, be the judge of that. Thought about this series. Thought I could actually package this thing up and sell it, make some money. But then I thought, that I'm a hobbyist and an enthusiast, and I really want to share and whatnot. So this whole thing is going to hit YouTube and just out there for the world to kind of see, and we'll take it from there. Let's jump on into the syllabus and get you familiar with what we're talking about covering in this 101 series on audio tube amps. Okay, I've got the syllabus up here, and as you can see, this is page 1 of about 5 or 6 in the syllabus, by the way. My goal here is to create a syllabus for basically a classroom, series of classes that would be very, I would call them practical and pragmatic, about tube amps, tube amp theory, tube amp construction, just kind of what's going on out there in tube amps these days. Who uses them, why, what are the different types, how are they built, how are they designed, lots of different elements. So kind of the goal would be to walk you through beginning to end. And I've got all the content in this syllabus, I think. It's not to say that as I move along I won't change the syllabus a little bit. It's not to say that I've got it in the perfect order. I haven't figured that out yet. Spent some time this morning trying to organize and putting things in order, but not to say that wouldn't change along the way either. So let's dive in a little bit. What I thought I would start out with in video number 1 is really what we've talked about thus far. I thought I would cover the entire syllabus with you, give you the gist of what it's all about. And then I thought I would just hit the first two topics up there today, just a little bit about myself and what I'm hoping to accomplish here with this video series. I thought in this first video we would talk a little bit about tube amp purposes and uses. So what are tube amps being used for these days, and why do they still exist, and why do people like them, things of that nature. And then in following videos, I thought the first one we could dive into some electronics basics as they relate to audio amplifiers. So, give you a good example here, kind of AC, DC, volts, ohms, current, power, resistors and potentiometers, capacitors, inductors, how you do some math around some of these things, how you add resistors and capacitors are different, and inductors. Thought I'd talk a little bit about what impedance is, what diodes are, difference between active and passive components, some basic rules, kind of Ohm's law, voltage divider, some other rules. Talk a little bit about frequency, what is that, ranges and response or whatnot. Thought we'd get into a little bit of safety around tube amps and electronics in general. Some tips that I would give as it relates to that, just to as we go further in the videos, we'll likely be doing some stuff and maybe even do some lab circuits and whatnot that you guys could play around with at home with a minimal amount of equipment. So just cover some safety concerns and tips and whatnot. Thought I would cover tube basics, kind of how they work, what's the different types, diodes, triodes, pentodes, beam tetrodes. Talk a little bit about operating modes with tubes. Talk a little bit about the filaments inside of them, the various components that make up a tube. Just so you got a good understanding of what a vacuum tube is per se. Thought we would do some schematics basics, so pick up several different amplifier schematics and kind of walk through those things left to right and talk about all the symbols in them, what the symbols mean. Talk about the various stages of the schematics and what makes them up or whatnot. Then I thought we would dive into a little bit, not a lot, just a little bit of what I call E-math. A little electrical engineering math, just enough to get you by as we go forward. It's really not tough stuff. A little bit of the background. If you did go off and decide, hey, I'm going to go get a degree in electrical engineering, some of what you would be learning there and why and how the difference between some of the theoretical, I would say, and the practical and whatnot. So that's kind of the first page of the syllabus. Let's change to the next page. All right, on the next page of the syllabus here, you could see I plan to get into a glossary of commonly used tube-related electronic terms. So when you hear the word, cathode follower, what do those words mean? What is a cathode? Or if you hear star ground, hey, what's star ground mean? Things of that nature. We'd jump into some tube amp topologies, so get into that a little bit itself. The various types, single-ended, you got single-ended parallel, single-ended ultralinear, parallel single-ended, push-pull parallel, OTL, output transformerless. There's a wide variety of amplifier classes, and I thought I would kind of demystify some of what all those are and what they mean. Thought we'd talk a little bit about power supplies, rectification. Do you go with solid state rectification? Do you do tube rectification? Kind of the pros and cons of those. Thought I'd talk a little bit about the difference between using AC heaters or DC heaters, in other words, lighting the filaments up on your tubes using either AC or DC. I thought I would talk a little bit about, some topologies within power supplies, kind of common or unique or special, kind of separate or specialized. Thought I'd talk about filtering, RC, which is a resistor capacitor, or LC, inductor capacitor, in other words, using a choke. Thought I'd talk a little bit about the terminology within the power supply world, the coupling between amplifier stages. As you look at an amplifier broken down into a block diagram, it has multiple stages, and often you have to couple those things together. Can use DC coupling, capacitive coupling, use transformers. I have transformers in there for that. We talk a little bit about biasing and what biasing is, and a little bit of the math that you'd have to know to do some biasing. What's the difference between fixed bias, self-biasing, sometimes called auto-biasing. Talk a little bit about idle current and some things of that nature, operating points and whatnot. And that would kind of cover the items on this syllabus. By this point, we're probably a good 4 or 5 videos into this series, would be my guess. Next up we would dive into then transformers, the difference between a power transformer, an output transformer, an interstage transformer. When we're talking about output transformers, we would, what is this whole 4 ohms, 8 ohms, 16 ohms thing? What does that mean? How does it relate to my speakers? Talk a little bit about single-ended output transformers and how those are different than push-pull transformers. Similarly, I think back up on the power, we would talk about, center tap transformers versus not. Cover a little bit of interstage. Talk a little bit about the quality of transformers and what that really means and where they make a difference and where they don't. Talk a little bit about sources of transformers and where you can get them at, and should you make your own, things of that nature. Probably a video on amplifier stages, the various types of input, and I've got too many letters in there. Should be SRPP. The different types of inputs, amplifiers stages. Talk a little bit about various amplifier stages, and trust me, this is not an exhaustive list. It's just a few things I typed off the top of my head. As we get into these videos, I'll add a lot more. Talk about the output stages. We'll talk about feedback. What is negative feedback, kind of global feedback, local feedback. There is such thing as positive feedback, and maybe where that's used a little bit, we could talk about that. Talk a little bit about phase inverters and what are those and when are they used. Hopefully by this point you're starting to hear a lot of words that you've probably heard before, but you had no idea really what they meant or what they were. So hopefully through these video series you could get at least a basic understanding of all these things. Okay, up next we would have some physical considerations. Do you go with PC board or point-to-point wiring? Kind of cabinet options, kind of layout. How do you lay this stuff out? Hey, what's a turret board and when are those used? Talk a little bit about jacks, inputs, outputs, switches, power connectors, things of that nature. Physical aspects of an amplifier. Thought we'd get into a little bit about grounding within amplifiers. Talk about power line considerations and safety items. There's these XY capacitors. You've got CL80 thermistors that get used in power lines. These feeds these days. Just lots of aspects around power line conditioning and considerations. Thought we'd get into selecting tube types. What are load lines? Talk a little bit about tube curves, a little bit about tube characteristics. Maybe talk a little bit about vintage tubes versus modern tubes being made these days, and some opinions and thoughts there. Talk a little bit about matched tubes, things of that nature. Selecting component types. So when you're trying to pick and purchase components to make an amplifier or upgrade or repair an amplifier, what do I use? Do I use those older carbon resistors, new metal films? Do I use, what type of coupling capacitors? That's almost a holy war, a religious debate per se. But what are the different types of coupling capacitors and when might I use what? Different types of electrolytic capacitors, etc. Various potentiometer types, various power cords and connections, different types of wiring that you could use inside the amplifier. Thought I'd talk a little bit about, lighting, things you do to an amplifier to make it more cosmetically appealing, and things like on and off lights or whatnot. Maybe meters on there to tell you current loads or whatnot on the various components. And then finally here we are on the home stretch, the last page of the syllabus. Talk about different tube sockets and different types of those. Get into a little more pragmatic kind of stuff. What's a variac and when and how would I use it? Dummy loads, kind of the differences, types there, resistive, reactive, kind of non-inductive. Thought we'd get into probably a full session on itself on common audio measurements. You hear things like percent total harmonic distortion, or THD, frequency response, distortion, linearity, crossover distortion, gain, decibels, dampening factor, harmonics, sag, hum, noise floor. You hear all these terms, and most people say, well, they probably tell me how good or bad something is, but they really don't know what these things are and what they mean and how they relate to their amplifier or what they might hear. So I thought we might talk through those. I thought we could spend a little bit of time on design tools, like Spice, the older P-Spice, newer things out there called like LT Spice, some bias calculators that exist and whatnot, just tools that you would use if you wanted to sit down from scratch and design an amplifier that help make that easier. Thought we'd hit some soldering basics, cover some various test equipment commonly used for audio work. Thought we'd get into a little bit of a section on chemicals and cleaning. What is this deoxit stuff and when should I use it, and is it always safe to use it, or should I use something else? Things of that nature. Just a little bit of tube testing basics. I made a video before on tube, using some tube testers, but I really didn't get much into the math or science behind it, and what the various values meant, things of that nature. I thought maybe we might get a little bit more theoretical, I would say, or academic. Then we get into some troubleshooting basics. How do you go about troubleshooting an amp? Because I can tell you right now that there's this 30 years of knowledge in my head that I'd love to dump out in this video. Just shortcut, save you a lot of time when you go to a flea market or somewhere and you pick up a piece of audio gear and you bring it home and you turn it on and it doesn't work. Well, what's wrong with it? And there's some, I would say, a methodical approach you can take, a methodology per se, to actually kind of walk from one thing to another to get to pinpoint really what's going on and what's wrong. It's a whole lot better than what I call big bang or shotgun approach to just trying to fix everything in the amplifier. And then I thought we could wrap this thing up with just some books, publications, internet websites, sources of knowledge. Hey, where do I go when I'm stumped or when I'm looking for some more knowledge or whatnot? Where do I go to get that? So I thought I'd share all that. But all that together would be this kind of classroom. Like I say, it's probably 10, maybe 15 or more videos it would take to make this whole series up. Really would want like your feedback on if this is the kind of stuff you're interested in and if it'd be of value to you. I will preface that this whole thing would be based on a couple things. One, it would be based on a lot of my opinions and thoughts of just things I've learned. So you can't take it for textbook. It's a lot of thoughts and opinions. Now, when I talk about something like Ohm's law, that cannot be my opinion. That is kind of a factual type thing. But when I talk about something like coupling capacitors or old tubes versus new tubes, those get into a whole lot of opinion space. So you just have to bear with me. My opinions may not match with your opinions, and we'll all just have to be okay with that. It's kind of the difference between somebody that likes an American-made car versus a foreign car, or whatnot. Somebody that likes wine more than beer. They're all opinions, and there's probably no right or wrong there. So let's dive into the first section that I told you. I think it is a little bit about myself, and then we're also going to talk a little bit about tube amplifier uses and whatnot today. So let's dive into that. Okay, this will probably be the one and only time you see a slide like this that talks about myself, but thought it was worth doing. My name's Mark Walker. I'm 45 years old. live kind of out in rural North Carolina, as you can tell from my slow southern drawl here. But I've got a lovely family, lovely wife Patty. I've got 3 teenage children: Megan, who's 21, Matthew, 19, and Michael, who's 17. 2 of which are in college right now. So if you're wondering where all my money goes, that's it. What's left over, I'll spend on my hobbies or whatnot. But from a credentials standpoint, I've got 3 college degrees: double E, electrical engineering. Got a business administration degree, and then I've also got a master's of science in management that's focused on information technology management. So might explain a little bit of my career. My day job, I'm in what I would call leadership in a large corporation in corporate America. I lead a group within the information technology function. I lead a entire department of enterprise architects, and that's kind of made up of a lot of different types of architecture: data architecture, security architecture, technical architecture, application architecture, so on and so forth. But the function I lead is basically designed to basically bring together this ecosystem of technology systems out there today, and make sure they all talk to each other, and ultimately that they holistically create systems for large corporations. So you think about, how does your general ledger talk to your finance system, talk to your fixed assets, talk to your point of sale, maybe talk to your credit card processing, maybe talk to your data warehouse, your authentication systems. What's all this infrastructure, applications, data kind of world. My team's goal is really high level to architect all that stuff together. Lots of other individuals in the organization that are experts deep in those topics, but we're kind of the overarching architects, and we also do a lot of business architecture. So what solutions does the business need to make them effective per se, and does IT have the capabilities to deliver that, and how do we bring those capabilities forward or whatnot. But it's kind of what I do for a day job. It's pretty stressful. So I come home, and how do I relieve my stress? I do what I really enjoy, which is this electronics hobby, if that makes sense. So I'll tell you, when I got my degree in electrical engineering some 25 years or more ago, I really never used it. I came out of electrical engineering and said, hey, what am I going to get a job doing here? And lo and behold, I found myself in IT, doing computer networking stuff. And from there, kind of moved into leading other infrastructure areas, systems, storage, mainframe, Unix, Windows, lots of different stuff over time, data functions, middleware integration stuff, and at any rate, it's been a fun ride to this point. But I never used my electrical engineering degree other than for my hobbies, and it always bothered me. I always thought, well, wow, I should get a job doing something electrical engineering based. But sooner or later through my life, I became okay with the fact that I ended up going back to school and getting more business savvy degrees per se, more leadership focused. But I've always hung on to this electrical thing, and it's funded my hobbies, and now what I'm planning for it to do is to kind of fund my retirement career. So as time goes on, my retirement goal is to basically expand this Blue Glow Electronics thing into a physical location. I have been hoarding vintage electronics for many years, and so one of those goals of hoarding all this stuff is, be able to have a shop where I could sell this stuff and people could come in and buy really nice restored vintage stuff. And it's hard to find that kind of stuff these days. If you try to find a shop that specializes in vintage stuff, high end, and where you can actually go sit down and listen to it and hear it and whatnot, talk about it. get stuff restored, maybe get somebody to build you something, design you something. Those shops don't exist these days, I'll tell you, because if they did, I would be visiting them myself. So kind of my long-term career aspirations, we'll figure that out. My goal is to retire when I'm 55 from corporate America. Once I get these kids through college, I think I'll be able to do that, and then just focus my time doing this stuff. Maybe teach some at night at community college or local four-year college, teach some engineering stuff or whatnot. But we'd figure it out as we go, and kind of do what I want to do for the last 20, 30, 40 years of my life. Not that I don't enjoy my day job. It's just if I had to pick, this is what I would do. I just can't quit my day job right now and do this. And my dog is wagging back here, but couldn't quit my day job and do this today. There's just not enough money in it to put three kids through college and support my hobbies and my wife and whatnot. But a few years down the road, it may become very, very feasible once I get a little bit further along in life and the house paid for and the kids through college per se, if that makes sense. Okay, we're almost done talking about myself here, but just a little bit about my hobbies. As you know, up in the top left, I do this electronics restoration stuff. Kind of up here in the top, I am a tube collector, so lots and lots and lots of tubes. I love them. Just love collecting them. It's kind of like it's almost like pickers and American pickers or whatnot. I'm always out digging, looking, trying to find tubes, and because there's gold in them their heels, I would say. The other thing, vintage cars. Spent many years restoring vintage cars. I restored several Cudas over time, some International Scouts, 69 convertible Camaro, whatnot. I don't do as much of it now. I just kind of enjoy driving them, but I have spent a lot of time over the years restoring vintage cars. Just not as much. It's not as lucrative as it once was to do that, to buy them, restore them, and flip them. And finding them is getting darn near impossible these days. So as you can see here, kind of down the bottom left, I'm a kind of an audiophile and a record collector. Got lots and lots of records. Which kind of leads up here to this thing in the middle, this little logo that says Grimtail Records. I actually run a record label. That's another hobby of mine. I put out about a half a dozen releases a year, typically 7-inch 45s. Local bands, mostly rock and blues based. Just have fun doing it. I really not in it to make money, more to just have fun, create some cool collector's items for local bands and whatnot. As you can see, speakers here. I'm a huge fan of JBL L100s, and that's a stack of 8 of them I've got. I think since then I've actually added 2 more, so up to 10 or 5 sets of them at this point, along with lots of other speakers and whatnot. But just gives you an idea. I kind of like to collect vintage electronics. Lots of amps, tons of Marantz gear, just lots and lots of stuff. Bottom right down here, kind of hard to see, but my 3 dogs kind of on the back of our property. We got some beautiful streams, pond, whatnot. The dogs love to go get in the water and play, and it's a good half mile off the road to the back of the property back there. So love living out here on a farm in the country per se. Then down here at the bottom, you can see a pretty connected in the electronics industry, kind of the record collector industry. One of the more pragmatic artists out there today is Jack White, and I'm good friends with some of the guys at Third Man Records, and I got to know Jack over time. This was actually a Third Man Records jukebox that I restored from kind of ground up for those guys, and if you ever go to Nashville, visit Third Man Records, you can go check out the jukebox if you get a behind-the-scenes tour there. But that's just a little bit of my hobbies. But most of my time these days is kind of spent up in this upper left-hand corner, kind of restoring electronics per se. So let's talk a little bit about what we hope to achieve out of this video series. First and foremost, I hope we have some fun, because if we're not having fun, it's not worth doing. So please give me some feedback on this format I'm using, the PowerPoint. Does it need to be more visual, more video based, whatnot? I just want to make this stuff fun for you. Second goal is for both you and I to learn something. So I'm 25 years out of formal textbook classroom at this point. So as I teach a lot of these topics, I'm going to have to go back and do some brushing up on things myself. Stuff that's general in my mind, I need to get a little more specific and whatnot. So I want us to stay safe, make sure we're dealing with lethal voltages inside of any type of tube amplifier, and so we're going to learn what it takes to stay safe around this stuff. I'm hoping we play around some and learn some different things, through experimentation through this series. I hope we adapt this series as we go along. I hope people are giving feedback and we decide, hey, more of this, less of that. Hey, what about this topic? You didn't even mention that. So adapt this thing as we go along. I hope we learn some useful things. So I hope the stuff you're learning is just not, kind of back of your head kind of stuff. I hope it's stuff you can actually go apply. I hope if you own a tube amplifier after you, gone through this and, you'd feel comfortable doing some things on your own, swapping out tubes or, if it's got a problem, maybe checking it out, maybe be able to fix it yourself or whatnot. I hope, you can apply those learnings, like I'm saying, go out there and maybe buy a piece of equipment at a flea market or something, bring it home, or a yard sale, bring it home and test it out. If something's not working, maybe figure out what that something is and actually fix it or whatnot. More than anything, I hope we demystify some fears, myths, and rumors. There's a lot of what I call FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, floating around out here in the tube world. And I think there are a lot of experts that like that. They like the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They want to be seen as that expert, but they don't necessarily want to share it. And there's a lot of other good experts out there that are very willing to share and very willing to kind of carry this hobby forward through useful learnings and whatnot. And then the other thing I hope this series does ultimately is inspire some future learning. So I hope it inspires you to go watch other YouTube videos, to buy some books, maybe even sign up for at a college, go take some classes or whatnot. I hope it inspires curiosity and wants you to continue on further into this hobby, and I don't know. That's what I'm all about. I'm a lifelong learner, so always reading, always learning, and I hope I inspire the same in you. Okay, we'll get into our first real topic today, other than our syllabus and me talking a little bit about myself, which is probably not all that interesting, but anyway, the first thing I thought I'd talk about is non-audio amplification uses for tubes today. The first thing I would tell you that is not all vacuum tubes have a glass enclosure around them. I know that's the typical stereotype, and most do. But you can see down here in this bottom right-hand corner, some of them are actually enclosed inside of metal. That's actually the inside of, if you see up in the top right-hand corner, the Alpha 9500. That is a commercially made RF radio frequency amplifier. That is, it's actually, that one's designed for ham radio use or amateur radio use. It basically operates from around 1 megahertz up to about 30 megahertz, which is what they typically call the HF range or high frequency range. But that's a product, you could buy one today. I think those alpha amplifiers run somewhere around $6,000 or $7,000. So if you're a very intense ham radio operator, you could use this to amplify your signal. That amplifier is what they call a legal limit amplifier. The legal limit in the United States for a RF amplifier is 1500 watts, which is a measure of power. And that amplifier will put out 1500 watts on what they call full duty cycle. So full duty cycle basically means non-stop. You could turn that thing on and leave it at full duty, at full 1500 watts non-stop, and the amplifier would run forever. That's a pretty tall feat, and not a lot of amplifiers will, and that's why this thing costs a lot of money. But just another note about myself: I am a ham radio operator. Kilo Golf 4 Foxtrot Delta Romeo is my call sign. If you ever want to look me up on QRZ or anywhere else, mostly hang out on 2-meter mobile, and I also have a Flex 3000 HF system here at the house that I use from time to time, listening in the background when I'm not when I'm working on stuff. So other uses you'll see these days: microwaves. So very, very, very high frequency stuff up in the gigahertz, which is billions of cycles per second. A lot of those units still use vacuum tubes. They lend themselves very well to those extremely high frequencies. And the other things you'll see vacuum tubes used for these days are medical devices. So if you ever go climb inside of an MRI machine or get a CT scan or whatnot, those things are driven by using extremely high frequencies at extremely high voltages. And believe it or not, the tubes inside of that MRI machine up there on the right that are conducting and scanning your body inside might be the exact same tube you see right down there in the bottom right hand corner that's driving that RF amplifier for ham radio use. So those are some places that tubes are still being used very actively these days. Matter of fact, a lot of the tubes get pulled out of MRI machines on a regular basis. So maybe they're on a time schedule versus them actually going in and measuring how strong the tube still is. They may just say, hey, we're going to swap out the tubes in this MRI unit every 3 months or something. So they pull these used tubes out, and they may not be bad. They may still be a really good solid tube. And a lot of the ham radio operators buy those tubes used then and put them in amplifiers like the ones you see on the right. They'll use them to build a circuit around or whatnot. So a little bit of the non-audio, what's useful out there today. Okay, and then the fun stuff while we're all here. The audio-based tube amplification that's being used these days. So first and foremost, just a good old microphone amplifier, like you see up here in the very top center. Somebody sings, it goes into an amplifier, has to take that teeny little bitty signal being created by your voice going into some type of microphone, and it has to amplify that upwards. And so a lot of people use a tube-based circuit for that. They believe the tube sound is much more appealing to the ears. Doesn't have some of the bad characteristics that they believe solid state amplifiers may have. So you'll see up in the top there, that middle amplifier, just a good old microphone amplifier. Over on the top right, guitar amplifiers. Man, that is where tubes kind of have never lost their end per se. The guitar guys all the way through. When solid state came out, a lot of people switched over to solid state because you didn't have these tubes to swap out and easier to service. But quickly they realized that, hey, I'm losing something here, which might be some of my sound that I want to maintain or the distinctiveness of their sound. So the tube guitar amps have been common throughout the last 4 or 5 decades here. So they just never have gone out of style, and they're still very, very popular today. Then you kind of see over here on the left this little green tube tone foot pedal, basically, that a guitar player would run their coming out of their guitar. They would run it into this little thing. And the whole purpose of a little guitar pedal is to really change the sound in some way, shape, or form before it goes into the amplifier. So in audiophile world amplifiers, we talk a lot about trying to get the closest and most pure signal possible feeding through the amplifier. So in other words, what's coming off of that vinyl record or off of that CD, we're trying to produce it as close as we can to the original source. Well, that's not the case in the guitar world. The guitar world, what your guitar is producing, a lot of people want to modify that. They want to give it tone. They want to give it crunch. They want to give it fuzz or hum or all sorts of different lingos out there for how they want to change their signal to give their unique playing style, kind of their own unique signature sound, if that makes sense. So that's what those little things on the left do, and a lot of guys like the sound that the tube units give them. Then you kind of got PA amplifiers, which you don't see as much anymore, but PA amplifiers are, really public address. You might see them in your corporate office or in a warehouse or whatnot, or maybe at a sports event. But it's basically what they can use a microphone and come over what you might call the intercom and announce loud audio broadcasts to everyone so that they can hear them. So here in the middle, you see an old, probably 1950s or so, Masco PA amplifier. A lot of people take these old PA amplifiers now and modify them either to be used for, audiophile use. So you take two of these mono PA amplifiers and put them together and maybe tweak the circuits a little bit, and all of a sudden you've got a set of stereo amplifiers for stereo use. Or you might take one of those and modify it to be, the head unit for a guitar or whatnot. So you see a lot of that going on these days. And now we can talk about some of the stuff a little near and dear to my heart. Over there on the right, beside that, kind of in the middle on the right-hand side, that's a phono amp. It's a bottle head. I think it's a Seduction or Foreplay, I can't remember. Phono amp that I built for a customer a while back. And basically you can see it has two inputs, those green wires there with a ground wire in the middle that's coming right off of a turntable. And it's got two tubes to it there on the front. Amplifies the signal up from basically what's coming off of a moving magnet cartridge on a turntable, and it amplifies it up to a signal that you can then feed into a basically line level. You could feed it into a preamp at that point, or potentially straight into an amp if the amp had a volume knob on it. But that's a phono amp I built a couple years back. I built a bunch of these bottlehead kits over time for various people. Really good units for the money. And man, if you want to learn how to apply some of this stuff we're doing here in these videos, somewhere along the way, order you a bottlehead kit or two and get to building. Great way to learn. A lot of good stuff. Then you kind of got preamp. So the purpose of a preamp is to kind of take a signal from the level of a device, whether that's coming out of your phono stage or whether that's coming off of a CD player. Maybe it's coming out of, could be coming out of your TV, could be coming from your cell phone, an iPhone, iPad, whatnot. But you got to amplify that thing up a little bit to get it into your final amplifier stage. Kind of got to get it to line level. But the other thing a preamp typically does is it gives you some control over things. So this is an audio research amplifier I picked up recently. It's an SP3 A1 model. Very great classic high definition preamp. And what it's got on the left knob there, volume knob, right? That whole section in the middle there, you can turn a button on or off that will let you adjust the tone. So if you want to adjust the bass, the treble, the balance, a little bit of the contour of the sound, you can do that with those knobs there in the middle. Or in this case of this amp, you can push a button and totally bypass that. So whatever comes in goes out. The only thing this thing's doing is amplifying and using a volume control. And then over on the other right-hand side, you got two more knobs. So those let you select the input. So this one has a phono input, a tuner input, maybe from an AM/FM tuner. It's got an auxiliary port, maybe where you'd want to plug in your iPhone or something. You got an input for tape, just various inputs. So it's got selectors that let you pick what you're inputting into into the circuit. Otherwise, you're constantly unplugging cables and plugging stuff in. So it's kind of the purpose of a preamp there. And then it's got one more knob down there on the bottom, and it lets you switch between like mono, stereo, maybe reverse the mono, the left and right channels, things of that nature. And give you a little control over your speaker outputs per se. So yeah, great little devices to have. And then ultimately the thing I love the most are just good old tube amplifiers. So this on the right here is a Macintosh 225 amplifier that I've had for probably 20 plus years. I paid $300 for it in the early 1980s, and this stuff just continues to climb. I'll give you an example: a 225 in the shape this one's in, fully restored these days, could run you upwards of $2,700 to $3,000, if that gives you a good idea. But lots of different variations on amplifiers. This is what they call a push-pull amplifier, and we'll be talking much more about that later. There are single-ended amplifiers we'll talk a lot more about, and there's pros and cons to each and followings of each out there in the industry. But these are kind of the typical uses for tube amplifiers these days. And the good news is the concepts we're going to learn in these video series apply to all of these. The main, somebody might say, well, what's the main difference between the tube amplifier and a guitar amp and the tube amplifier and a stereo amp? Well, a couple differences. The guitar amp probably only has one channel. The stereo amp probably has two. The stereo amp's probably designed to take whatever signal comes into it and as accurately as it can reproduce that on the output. The guitar amp, probably not. You've got all sorts of control knobs on the front of a guitar amp. Vibrato, you've got, sustain, you've got all kind of knobs there where you're actually changing the sound to give your guitar playing sound something unique to you. The difference between how a Jimi Hendrix sounds on a guitar and, Jimmy Page and, say a Jack White or somebody else. A lot of that has to do with the knobs and the settings and what they care about. And these pedals that we showed here earlier, if they all plug their instruments into the same setup, they might sound an awful lot alike. Now, sure, they've got their own style of playing, but their sound would be very similar, if that makes sense. So a lot of these guys, their signature sound comes from this gear. It comes from the guitar they choose. It comes from the amplifier they choose. It comes from the pedal. It comes from the settings on those amplifiers. It may come from the brand of tubes that they choose to use. Things of that nature. So a little bit different world in the guitar world than it is the audiophile world, stereo, where you're just trying to accurately reproduce everything. The big differences are really in these extra things you add, the basic circuits, the basic components, the basic amplification. It's all the same throughout all these devices shown on this page here. So that'll help demystify some stuff as we get into a little more of the how and the what and the why on these things. So guys and gals, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this thing up here, coming to the end. I just want to talk a little bit today, this is kind of an intro or primer session. It's also a session where I get some feedback on, hey, is this the stuff you want to hear about and what you want to learn more about? And go back and look over that syllabus a few times and see if that stuff makes sense to you. And we'll kind of take it from there. But thanks for watching, everybody. I know it's a lot of talking in this lecture type series versus some of my other videos are much more video and active based. But hopefully this will appeal to you and we can kind of take it from here. Thanks again, and thanks for watching Blue Glow Electronics. And if you get a chance, come like us on Facebook and spread the word. Share these videos with your friends. Share them with the groups you hang out with online and whatnot. And we'll keep growing and we'll keep doing more and more. Thanks again, everybody. All right, one last thing I'll leave you with as we're signing off here. I do plan to continue my other videos, the restoration, the building, whatnot, and intermingle them with these lecture videos, just FYI.